Hi everyone, my name is Maya. I'm a freelance journalist and a volunteer at AntiPornography.org. And I have an article about supposedly feminist porn that was recently published at Fair Observer. And today in this video, I'll be talking about that article.
Great. And I'm JC, and I'm the executive director of AntiPornography.org, a non-religious, non-partisan organization that works to prevent and combat the harms of pornography, prostitution, and sex trafficking. So welcome, Maya. This is exciting that your article got published in Fair Observer, and it's a really great article. Well done.
Thank you.
Yes, I think a lot of people are going to learn a lot from it. So we are now going to discuss.
So.
Yes, I think they will. And they can learn a lot from this video, too, because we're going to be going over all of the points in the video. So why don't we just start off with, you say that there's a trend in the last few years called, quote, unquote, feminist porn. So can you just define for our viewers what you mean by feminist porn and why you put it in quotes?
Sure. So in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the trend in the feminist movement was that it was largely anti-pornography. It was critical of pornography for various reasons, and some of those reasons we'll talk about today in the video. And then starting in the 80s, 90s, and basically since then, the trend in the feminist movement has been more liberal, more accepting of pornography, sometimes even going to the extent of promoting pornography or being, pro-porn. So feminist porn, as far as I'm aware, is a relatively recent development. And what it is that it's currently a niche within pornography where it's directed usually by women who consider themselves feminists. It's more oriented towards female pleasure. It typically has a female consumer in mind, whereas mainstream pornography tends to have a male consumer in mind. There's allegedly more emphasis on, real pleasure, breaking down traditional gender roles, non-traditional sexuality, so more, experimentation, more female-friendly sexuality, if you will. And the reason why I put it in quotes is because I actually don't think that it delivers what it promises.
I see. Okay. So why don't you then just address that? So, because in theory, what you're describing is basically sexually explicit material, which would not be exploitative or misogynist, and so therefore would be quite different than most regular porn, and therefore wouldn't be that bad. So, but you're saying that in practice, it doesn't really turn out to be that way. So can you describe what you mean by that and maybe some examples?
Sure. So I think there's a couple of problems or issues with feminist porn and, various reasons why it doesn't live up to what it promises. One of the issues that I had when I was researching this was that I found that many of the people who call themselves feminist pornographers have ties with and often work within the mainstream industry, which is extremely exploitative, extremely abusive, extremely sexist. So, that already, when I found that out, that was already like kind of ringing bells in my mind or setting off red flags. One of the other issues is that, there's all this very promising talk about breaking down gender roles and showing non-traditional sexuality, which, means more female-friendly sexuality and made with a female consumer in mind. Some of it may genuinely be made with a female consumer in mind, but I don't think that it is, as new and subversive and edgy as it's made out to be. Some of the titles that I've seen have been things like Submissive Slut or Babes in Bondage 4, things that you would really find in the mainstream industry and things that are frankly very sexist, very, traditional, very male-dominated, and it's, I just don't see what's new or radical about it, I guess. And I also think that there's really, I don't see a lot of people asking some of the more radical questions, like, what are the what are the kinds of people that get into porn? Why do they get into it? What's their background? Is it really just something that they do because they want to explore sexuality, or is it because they don't have other options? And if it's that, then why don't they have other options? And why are most of these people female? So I don't see that, and I don't see, a lot of people, who are involved with this asking questions like, does sex need to be a commodity? Does it need to be something that can be bought and sold on a market? Is buying sex from somebody else really something that we have a right to? Or is it just something that we've grown used to and something that we feel entitled to because of, this male-dominated society that says certain things about sex? So there's just various ways in which I don't think feminist porn lives up to the promises that it makes.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you for elaborating on that. So another point that you bring up, which is very relevant, is that anti-porn feminists often seem to be portrayed as being outdated and anti-sex. And in some ways it seems that feminist pornographers or people who support feminist porn are trying to present that as something more modern and as a healthier alternative to anti-porn feminism because they want to be seen as being pro-sex or sex positive. And so can you just elaborate on that and, tell us what the truth is about anti-porn feminism and, whether it's anti-sex or not? Obviously, I don't think it is, but, I'd just like to hear what you have to say.
Sure. I think for a lot of women, whether they, consciously call themselves feminists or not, we haven't had a lot of opportunities throughout history, I think, to genuinely own our sexuality. There's been a lot of repression. There's been a lot of censorship. And I think a lot of women are very, understandably tired of that. And, unfortunately, I think that people have this slightly simplistic understanding where they just think porn equals sex and that's kind of the end of the story. And so if you say I'm against porn, that's sometimes perceived as like, you have a problem with sex, or you're not comfortable with it, or you're in favor of repression or censorship. And so I think there are some women and feminists who, in their overly simplified understanding, just kind of jump on the pro-porn bandwagon in this attempt to reclaim our sexuality. And with anti-porn feminism, it's not that we think sex is bad, or that we're anti-sex, or that we're against women exploring our sexuality. It's just that we don't think that pornography is a healthy model of sexuality. We think that porn is exploitative, that it's abusive, and I think there's a lot of evidence for that if you look at some of the stories of women who have been in porn, like Vanessa, who's done some other videos with AntiPornography.org. You can check her videos out on your channel. So, it's not that we're against women exploring our sexuality. It's not that anti-porn feminists are, that we like censorship or repression, or that we think sex is bad. It's just that we think pornography is a very twisted, unhealthy kind of, pornography portrays a very twisted, unhealthy kind of sexuality. And it's not all that sex could be. Like, there's other ways that sex can be expressed, in our culture. And, I think anti-porn feminists are in favor of finding ways to express it, in a healthier way instead of, the pornographic way.
Okay, got it. So wouldn't you say, though, that what most feminist pornographers would say in response to that is that they agree with you that a lot of porn is exploitative of women and misogynistic and doesn't really portray authentic female sexuality? So that's their whole goal, is to, portray the better version. So that's what they're doing?
Right. again, I'm making generalizations because there are different people who are feminist pornographers and different people who make different things and call it feminist porn. But generally speaking, again, from what I've seen, I'm not entirely convinced that it's as new and that it's as new and subversive as it claims to be. I've seen titles like Submissive Slut, titles like Babes in Bondage 4, things that you would just typically see in mainstream porn. So I'm not entirely sure how exactly that lives up to what they make it out to be. But again, I think that, even if you had the absolute most, the healthiest portrayal of sexuality positive in videos and sexually explicit material, I think we need to ask ourselves the question of who is in porn and why are they there? Is it really because they just want to experiment with their sexuality, or is it because of a lack of options? And, I've talked to and read many things from women who have been in porn, and also, gay men and transgender people, and it is usually people who don't have a lot of options and who basically don't have alternatives. And this is something that even feminist pornographers admit. There was a segment called After Porn Ends in which Nina Hartley admitted that many of the people who end up in the porn industry are people who aren't suited for 9-to-5 work. They don't have other skills, other qualifications. They often don't come from the best background. And, given that most of those people are female, I think we need to be asking much more serious questions about why it is that so many women are in that position to begin with. No matter, irrespective of how they're portrayed in these supposedly feminist films. And again, I think we also need to ask ourselves whether sex really needs to be a commodity. Do we really need to buy sex from other people? Is that something that we're entitled to? Is that something that has to be part of our sexual culture? And, I don't see a lot of people in the feminist porn camp even considering those questions, let alone answering them. So.
Okay. Got it. So in what you just said there, you referred to the issue of not just the feminist pornographers, the people who are making it or the people who are watching it, but the women who are participating in it. And so that's a very important point that we should address right now. And you mentioned Vanessa, and she was in the porn industry for about 5 years, and in the sex industry on the whole for about 7 years. And just to let our viewers know out there that we have another video that we did with Maya and with Vanessa as well, in which Maya interviewed Vanessa prior to writing your article, Maya, on feminist porn. And so that's where you got some of the material for your article, in which Vanessa shares with you a lot of very important points. And one that you write here in your article is a quote from Vanessa where she says, "I never met any woman that had a professional career and left it to go into porn just for fun." So, and then to continue the quote, "Many got into it because of financial desperation. Many also had abusive childhoods. I had a roommate who had been on the streets prostituting herself since the age of 14, and by the time she got into porn at 18, it was all she knew." So I think it's really important for the viewers out there, if they're watching feminist porn, to not think of it as the theoretical idea that feminist pornographers like to put forward, that this is sexual liberation, but to realize that although some of the performers may be there on their own terms, may have other options, may have an education, that those women would be the minority, and the majority of them would be women like Vanessa and the woman that she described who had been prostituted since the age of 14, and that they have limited options because of lack of education, or for other reasons, or they were exploited or abused when they were younger, and that if someone is supporting feminist pornography, that not only should they think about that, but they should realize that perhaps that they are contributing to the exploitation of the performers and supporting that exploitation by watching or buying that sort of pornography.
Mm-hmm. And can I also just jump in and say something related to what you were just saying?
Sure.
In addition to the women who, as JC so eloquently explained, many of them don't have other options.
Right. I think it's also important to mention here, as Vanessa discusses in some of her articles and perhaps some of our videos, I can't remember, that it may seem that when you're making all that money at the beginning, like, this is great, I've got a career, it's making good money, but, the amount of time that people last in the porn industry is often very short. I think the average is 2 years or something like that, and a lot of women just last a few months. So you have to factor in what the long-term consequences are of being in the porn industry, and if these particular people found it hard to find gainful employment prior to being in the porn industry, the unfortunate fact is that once they've been in the porn industry, it is significantly harder once they get out to find employment that they can survive off of. Often they don't have a resume. They have gaps in their work history. The people who they are applying to, they will Google their name, and often, even though they've used a different name in porn, their real name will have become associated with it. And so when an employer is searching, they will find out that that person has been in porn. And so on top of whatever original issues were there will just be new ones that will prevent them from getting jobs that they can live off of, and that's often, in fact, why a lot of people end up back in the sex industry, whether doing regular porn or so-called feminist porn. It isn't necessarily because they really want to be there. It's often because they didn't have the options in the first place, and then once they were in porn, they realized that they had even less options and had to go back. So I think people who are watching porn and getting off on it need to ponder that, what the reality is of the performers who are there.
Absolutely. And I would just say, for those people who are watching this video and who also support either mainstream quote unquote regular porn or specifically feminist porn, I think it's important to keep in mind that by consuming it and by driving up demand, that you are playing a part in these people suffering. You are supporting that. And that may not be your intention, but I think it's very important to realize and understand that.
Agreed.
And not take part in it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So one of the other points that you make in your article is that a lot of people these days, particularly feminists of the past 10 or 20 years, because feminism seems to have been defined as something individual for each one, it seems almost that any choice a woman makes can be defined by them or others as feminist, and so therefore they are not to be questioned because the choice is the almighty thing that rules everything else. And so can you just address that and how that plays into this issue of feminist porn?
Sure. I think with sexism in general, we need to keep in mind that it's not just an individual thing, although there may be individual people and individual men who are sexist, but it's also a social thing. It's part of our society. And if we're ever realistically going to end it, we need a movement that's, we don't all have to agree with each other, but there does have to be some sense of collectivity and some sense of working together. So, with the issue of individual choices that women make, I think we have to keep two things in mind. One is we have to always ask the question, what is the context in which that choice is made? And what I mean by that is we always have to keep in mind things like, for something to be a choice, you have to have alternatives that you can realistically pursue. So if you don't have any alternatives, it's not really much of a choice. And we always need to be asking the question, when a woman seems to be choosing one thing, we always need to be questioning, did she really have any alternatives? And if she didn't, then, it's not that we should blame her or that she's a bad woman or that she's responsible for sexism, but we need to understand that that's not automatically a feminist thing, that she chose the one option that was available to her after a sexist society took all of her other options away. And then the second thing that we need to keep in mind when it comes to individual choices is that even in situations where women have more control and more power and have alternatives that they can pursue. Again, the reality is that every choice that we make eventually has some kind of impact on other people. And not every choice, but a lot of choices, most of our choices. So in situations where women do have more power and more control, and where, a woman really is making an informed choice out of several different options, I think we also need to think about how her choice is going to impact other women and how her choice is going to impact society as a whole.
Right. Absolutely. I really don't believe that there is any such thing as, a choice that only affects you when it comes to something that is that public. I mean, because I know a lot of people who are watching this video. Hi, viewers out there. We know what you're going to say. And we know that you're going to say, who are you to tell other people what to do with their bodies and how they should have sex? So, why don't you just directly answer that question now? So Maya, who are you to tell other women what to do with their lives, or whether they're being feminist or not, or, who to have sex with, etc.?
Right. It's not about me telling anybody anything. It's just, first of all, with feminist pornography specifically, because that's what we're talking about right now, it's not just what you're doing. It's also something very public, because it is filmed. It does get sold on a marketplace. So, it's actually quite different from you just having a sexual relationship with somebody in the privacy of your own home. This is something much more public than that. And again, I just want to emphasize that particularly for the women or trans people or whoever who is in the pornography, it's not that we're judging them. It's just that we have to understand that their choice is often from a limited position. And, a random analogy that comes to mind is, let's say in a very racist society, people who are of a particular race can't or have a difficult time getting hired for certain jobs, and they're only allowed to do certain quote-unquote bad jobs. In a situation like that, it's not that people who accept those bad jobs are bad people or that they're traitors to their own race or whatever it is. It's just that we understand that they're accepting that bad job isn't in and of itself some kind of action that's going to end racism simply because they made some kind of a choice. We understand, again, not blaming them as an individual, but we just understand the social structures that led to them only having that choice. And that's exactly that's the way that I see it with pornography in general and also with feminist pornography. It's not that we're blaming women or trans people or anybody else who's in it. It's just that I think it's important to keep in mind how limited they are sometimes.
Got it. Good points. Okay, and so in your article you address another very important point, which is the effects of that pornography that is created, including some feminist porn, on the viewers, and then what those viewers sometimes end up doing. So specifically what we're referring to here is how watching porn, even if the women who participate in it call themselves feminist, even if they're, choosing to be there, how the portrayals of women in those videos can actually fuel not only sexism, but cruelty, misogyny, and violence against women in society in real life against other women who, did not choose to participate in degrading porn, but end up getting that sort of script played out on them in real life. So can you just expand on that a little bit?
Sure. I think before I get into that specifically, I just want to backpedal a little bit and talk about the word pornography and what pornography is about as a genre.
Sure.
So it's comes from Greek words, and the word porne, I think that's how it's pronounced, originally meant female sex slave, and it was in ancient Greece the lowest, cheapest in the literal sense class of prostitute. It was literally female sex slaves. It was women who had been forced into prostitution and who were considered disgusting, dirty, cheap, vile, and who were available for people, and especially men, to do anything they wanted with. And then the word graphos means writing or sketching or drawing of. So when you put the two together, the word pornography basically means depicting female sexual slavery or depicting women as vile whores. So it's, again, going back to this thing where people sometimes have this simplistic understanding that porn is just sex, like in a neutral way, and that's all it is, and it can be anything people make it out to be. I think we need to understand that as a genre, it's always been explicitly and very intentionally women-hating and sexist. It's never been about the kind of neutral sexuality that some people seem to think it is about. And we see evidence of that when we look at the way that porn has evolved over the past few decades, how it's increasingly gone more violent, more degrading, more sexist, more women-hating, more body punishing. And that's because porn as a genre is specifically about sexuality as violence. It's about forced sex. It's about women-hating. It's not, again, some kind of neutral sexuality. So, whether the pornography in question is directed by people who consider themselves feminist or whether it's, supposedly regular pornography, there have been a lot of studies that have looked at how pornography has influenced people who watch it, and especially men who watch pornography. And the reason why I'm emphasizing men is two reasons. One is that most of the consumers are male. And the second one is that, even besides the issue of pornography, we live in a society that encourages men to be aggressive, dominant, to relate to women in certain ways. Boys are basically raised thinking that they need to be the dominant ones, they need to be aggressive, they need to be more assertive, they need to always come out on top. And so when you take that kind of social pressure and that kind of socialization, and then you have boys and men who consume pornography, who watch it, who absorb all of the messages in it, the effect is basically disastrous. There is study after study after study after study that shows that porn desensitizes men to violence against women, and even worse than that, that pornography, not only does it desensitize them to violence against women, but that it shapes the way that they see sex, so that sex for them becomes about conquest, it becomes about violence, it becomes about treating women badly, that it becomes tied to all of these things, so that it's hard for men and boys who have been raised with pornography to even imagine sex in a different way, or to even feel sexually aroused unless they're dominant, unless they're aggressive. In the article I talk about one women's shelter in New York City that has been more vocal than some other shelters about the role that pornography plays in the abuse that many women at the shelter experience. And that's something that we see not only with women who are, in domestic violence situation, but also with rape victims. Basically, since pornography has become more and more part of mainstream society, what we've seen is that there is more rape. Rapes have become more brutal, but there is less reporting of rapes and less people, and particularly men, actually paying any kind of legal consequences for what they do, because of how society becomes so desensitized to sexual violence.
Got it. Well, those are very good points, and we definitely agree that porn fuels violence against women and children, and possibly even men sometimes as well. So 2 points on that. One is that I can already hear the voices of people who support feminist porn who are watching this going, well, yes, that may be true with a lot of mainstream pornography, but that's the whole point of feminist pornography. It's different. It doesn't promote violence against women, it treats women as equals and blah, blah, blah. So how would you respond to that? And say, that feminist porn wouldn't fuel that violence like regular porn. Right.
Okay. So I have a few thoughts about that. One is that, again, I've seen some of the titles and seen some of the things that are promoted or called feminist pornography. And my observation of it is that it's not less violent than mainstream pornography, basically. There's still a lot of violence in it. There's things like BDSM. There's, the man ejaculating on a woman's face, which frankly is pretty degrading. There's all these things that are in mainstream porn. And one of the main differences is that directors of feminist pornography will say, well, the women really did choose to do it. They had these wonderful working conditions. Again, I think that fails to address the issue of why the women are in any kind of porn to begin with, the lack of options that often drives it. And I think, again, it goes back to this whole issue of individual choice. Like I said, even if there's a woman who's very well educated, very middle class, and who, even on a personal level really enjoys BDSM or some of the other things that are part of feminist pornography, even if all of those things are true, and they're not for most of the women, but even in the cases where they are true, there's not much consideration for how it affects the consumers, for how it reinforces certain stereotypes that people already have in mainstream society. And one more thing that I would mention about feminist porn is that, let's imagine the absolute best circumstances where you have women who are middle class, educated, have other alternative options, and who are in this purely for the sake of, sexual experimentation, and they're treated wonderfully on set, and they're in films that aren't even violent. There's very little
what
of
you
that.
just described, right, is I think what a lot of people think the majority of feminist porn is like. So is what we are saying.
And that's I'm saying that that's most of what is feminist porn is not even that.
Okay, so I would like to just say to all of the people out there who are watching, who are saying, oh, no, that's not true, you're just cherry-picking the worst, right? So there's actually a study that addresses this exact topic, and it examines the content of pornography that is done by female directors. In other words, what would normally be considered feminist pornography. So we're going to put a link to that study in the description of this video, and those who would like to check it out can do so. And it shows very clearly that there is a great deal of violence and abuse in porn that is directed by women, many of whom, if not most of whom, would consider themselves to be feminist pornographers. So just to let people know out there, that sort of porn where it includes violence or abuse is not the exception in feminist or women-directed porn. It's actually the majority. And, we have the study to prove it, so people can check that out. All right, great.
And I just want to say that, even in this, absolutely ideal situation that almost never exists. Even in that situation, again, I think we have to ask ourselves, why is sex a commodity? Why is it that we can buy somebody else's sexuality? And is that really something that we're entitled to? I think that particularly men and boys grow up in a culture where they're told that they are entitled to that and that they are entitled to women's bodies. And I think we need to start challenging that more, and I just don't see feminist porn doing that. In fact, I see feminist porn kind of feeding into that because it's reinforcing this idea that people have a right to buy somebody else's sexuality and that there's a sort of better way to do it.
Got it. Okay, and one other point that I would like to mention that you address in your article is that a lot of porn, what's common in porn is a lot of sex acts, which are actually sometimes quite painful or degrading for the women, and that a lot of them are either drunk or high, or otherwise under the influence when they're doing a lot of that type of porn. Vanessa specifically says that she did coke sometimes, but mostly drank, and then she got into painkillers, and that she says you just can't do that stuff sober. So that's another point to remember, that it may look like they're having a great time there on screen, and look, it's feminist porn, but some of the women who show up for that are just doing it because of lack of other options, and that they are literally having to drug themselves to get through it. And so the consumer, if they're taking pleasure in that, are really, supporting the pain and suffering of somebody else, and they should consider that perhaps before they continue to consume more of it.
Absolutely.
Good. Okay, so another thing that you mentioned is that there are such a thing called the Feminist Porn Awards that takes place every year in Toronto. So, and then you discuss the things that qualify a film as feminist. Right. So can you just discuss the awards a little bit and, you know, what they're for and what your opinions are and what you address in your article?
Sure. So it's basically an award ceremony for so-called feminist porn. It's in order to nominate or submit a film for consideration. There are certain criteria that it has to meet. So, and there's basically 3 criteria. From what I understand, it's enough for a film to meet one of these criteria in order to be considered. So the criteria are one, that a woman or other traditionally marginalized person, like a person of color or a transgender person, had a hand in the production, writing, or direction of the work. Criteria number 2 is that it depicts genuine female pleasure. And number 3, it expands the boundaries of sexual representation and challenges stereotypes that are often found in mainstream porn. So, particularly for the first point, I just want to point out that there are actually within the so-called mainstream industry, there's a lot of stuff that, where a woman has some hand in producing it, writing it, creating it in some way other than being an actress in it. And it doesn't make the films any less exploitative, less abusive, less sexist, and less hurtful. You have to keep in mind that in addition to the sexism that drives pornography, there's also the fact that this is a business and people in it are primarily driven by money. They're not driven by, some abstract sense of female solidarity. So the fact that a woman produced it, wrote it, directed it doesn't guarantee anything, basically.
Got it. Okay, so just a question. Is it all 3 of these points that have to be present for something to qualify as feminist porn, or is it just any one of them?
From what I understand, it has to be at least one.
Okay, all right. So in other words, therefore, the woman-directed porn that is in that study that I referenced, according to these standards, simply having a woman direct it would make it qualify as feminist porn. Is that correct?
I believe so. And I could be wrong about that, but again, my impression is that at least one of the 3 criteria is enough.
Okay, great. All right, so number 2 is kind of ironic when it says it depicts genuine female pleasure. Well, I guess there's a difference between it depicting it and it actually being true. I mean, because if you read the quotes from Vanessa in the article, it makes it clear that, she was not definitely enjoying it a lot of the times, including times when she was, being directed by a woman, that she had to be on painkillers. So just because it looks as if the woman is enjoying it and saying, oh, yes, this is great, I think it's important for people to go beyond the depiction and actually consider the actual reality of what is going on with the individual. So that seems like a rather kind of shallow point, that it depicts genuine female pleasure rather than it, if it said it depicts genuine female pleasure and it actually includes genuine female pleasure, that would be something different. But depicting it is just a matter of acting, so that doesn't really mean that much at all. Okay, and then the third one, can you explain this a bit, where it says it expands on the boundaries of sexual representation on film and challenges stereotypes that are often found in mainstream porn. So
well, I think the idea is also, mainstream porn is very simplistic in that it all, even though there's different categories or different niches, it's all basically, the vast majority of it is kind of the same script where the man is very clearly dominating the woman, or in some cases dominating another man if it's gay porn. I think the idea with this third point is that feminist porn ideally should, in their view, challenge traditional gender roles, maybe show women in more dominant positions, do something new in that sense. And like I said, I have seen some of the titles, I've seen some of the things that are considered feminist pornography. I don't think that it actually does that in many cases. I think that a surprising amount of it actually follows the traditional, the man is very clearly dominating the woman, or the man is very clearly dominating another person kind of script. But I would also, just quickly like to say that, even if you have movies where the woman is dominating a man, for example, I think a lot of people on the surface would see that and think, oh, great, like that, breaks down traditional gender roles or something like that.
Right. Like that would qualify for this point number 3 in some people's minds.
Right. It might, it might qualify for the third point, but I think from an objective perspective, I think we have to ask, does there always really have to be somebody who's dominating somebody else in sex? Like, is that really the only or the best way to express sexuality? That would be point number 1 that I would raise. And then the other point I would raise is that because we don't actually live in a female-dominated society, we live in a male-dominated society, even just within pornography, women who are coming into the industry, particularly as actresses, are often at a disadvantage compared to a lot of the men who perform in pornography. And so even if you have this, what's sometimes called femdom, where the woman, it's like a BDSM type thing, and the woman dominates the man. Often what that actually is that the man is masochistic, and the woman is still kind of an object who's just there to please the man. And that, I know that sounds like that's not what you would think of when you first hear of a woman dominating a man, but the point is that the man is still kind of the center of attention. He's still the authentic human being, the dominant one, and the woman is just kind of there to give him pleasure. It's just that he gets pleasure in a non-traditional way. So, again, I would go back to what I said earlier. I think we need to ask the question, does there always have to be somebody who's dominating somebody else in sexuality? Like, is that the only or the best way to explore sexuality, to represent it, to do it?
Got it. Right. Well, that's a very good point. I mean, just because the representation is the woman dominating the man doesn't mean that that's signifies equality, or that it signifies healthy sexuality, or anything else, Okay, great. All right. So I think a really important quote here from your article is, what Vanessa says, which is, just to get this from the people who have been in porn, right? The consumers out there who are still saying, but I want to watch feminist porn, and they want to make it. So what's the matter with that, right? Well, not everybody really wants to make it. Sometimes they're just doing it to be paid. So I don't think that they should necessarily.
I think that's the majority of cases.
Exactly. And so I think the majority of the rank and file of porn performers are sometimes drowned out by the few very vocal spokespeople for either pornography or for so-called feminist porn. And so we're not saying that there aren't a few people who are doing it by choice. We're just saying that those people who are often very vocal and stand up for it aren't the majority, that they're the minority. So the people who the people who are the majority, like someone like Vanessa says, I just wish that people would stop it with this, well, she chose to be in it, so I don't feel guilty watching it. Yes, I know I chose to be in it. I know other women chose to be in it, but a lot of these women have been abused horribly when they were younger. They've gone through a lot. They have drug issues. Just because they made that choice doesn't mean it's okay to watch their pain. So I think that is a really important point for the consumers out there, whether they're watching feminist porn or other porn, to remember that what they're watching is often the pain of the performers.
And that by watching it and by driving up demand, that they're contributing to that.
Exactly. So, frankly, that doesn't seem particularly feminist. And I'm sure that the feminist pornographers watching this would say, well, they never, employ women who have to use drugs in their films or who are in pain. But, from what I understand from after doing many interviews with Vanessa, she did a good job, like many do, of just basically hiding that. She didn't announce that she was on painkillers when she arrived on set. She didn't complain. She just showed up, with already having taken the painkillers and just did her job. So it's not like the so-called feminist pornographers who are making the feminist porn are necessarily going to have the greatest awareness, really, of what is the true reality of the performers that they're using, So just because they say that they're not actively harming people doesn't mean that they're not using people who are abused or harmed or being exploited or, otherwise, not really there because they want to be. Good.
And I just want to briefly mention something that I don't think we've mentioned before in this video. And again, I know that there are exceptions. So, if you're in pornography and you're not in this category, I'm not saying everybody is like this, and I'm not trying to sort of tar everybody with the same general brush. But there is a very large number of people in pornography, and I've seen estimates ranging between 60% to 90%, but it is basically a majority who have had some kind of childhood sexual abuse even before they got into porn. And, if you're a director, whether in the regular industry or, so-called feminist pornography, you obviously don't have time to get into everybody's background and find out how they grew up, and, you may not see that as your business, but that childhood sexual abuse that many people, and particularly the women in porn, have experienced often influences their sexuality and their perceptions of it, and it often doesn't put them in the best place. And I'm not saying that every individual director, whether in regular porn or feminist porn, takes advantage of their vulnerability, but I just think that it creates the sort of unequal imbalance of power that's really stacked against the performers, and particularly the women in it. And you might consider yourself a feminist pornographer, and you might genuinely have the best intentions in the world, but it's, if you're dealing with an industry like pornography, I think it's pretty much almost impossible to completely avoid that problem and completely avoid taking advantage of people who don't necessarily have the healthiest sense of sexuality and of their own bodies.
Exactly. 2 points on that. One is that Vanessa wasn't necessarily overtly sexually abused when she was younger, as an example, but if you read all of her articles on our website and watch her videos, if anybody out there does that, they can certainly see that she had numerous other factors which influenced her ending up in the porn industry, and that she was not in a mentally and emotionally healthy state, when she chose to go into it, and it ended up doing her great harm. So it's really important for the viewers to realize, that just because something's called feminist pornography doesn't mean, that they are actually supporting something with truly empowered people there who are there on their own choice and who aren't under the influence of drugs or aren't, influenced by their prior sexual abuse or personal issues. So, okay, great.
And I just want to jump in and say something about that. I think some of the people who are watching this, who consider themselves feminists, whether it's feminist pornographers or just members of the public, would say that we're kind of victimizing these women by portraying them in this way.
Right.
And I just like to point out the fact that actually what victimizes many of these women, obviously not all of them, but what victimizes many of these women is the society that is sexist, and whether it's their childhood sexual abuse from, wherever, or the fact that they are poor, often precisely because they are female. Those kind of sexual social structures are what victimize women. Us, by taking notice of this and by calling it out, we're not taking away these women's choices. It's the sexist society that has taken away their choices, and we're just pointing that out precisely because we want these women to have more choices. So, yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Right, good point. Speaking of which, for all the people out there who do say that, so why are you trying to take away women's choices?
Right.
Who are you to tell women what to do, right? First of all, we would like to point out the fact that we have no power whatsoever to take away anybody's choice, and if somebody out there wants to either be in porn or to direct porn or to watch porn, we cannot in any way stop you. We have no control over that, no power over that, and that is not our goal. Our goal is simply to provide educational information to people so that they can make informed choices, so that they can understand what it is they're choosing to do if they participate in porn or direct it or produce it or consume it. So fear not, all you people out there, you still have your choice to watch or produce feminist porn if you wish, and all that we're hoping here with this video is for you to understand what it's really about so you can make an informed choice. Okay, good. So is there anything else that you would like to say about this issue of feminist porn or your article or anything else?
Sure. I actually just want to wrap up this video by talking about something that I talk about at the end of my article as well. And that is basically that for those of you who are watching this or who read the article, I think we need to, if we care about feminism or women's issues or womanism or whatever you want to call it,
just women.
I think we need, or just women, or just the well-being of women,
or
even
girls.
The women, girls. Again, I think we need to understand that sexism isn't just about individual people, individual attitudes, individual choices. There are actually structures that are part of society, and we need to change those structures by having a movement that thinks about the greater good of women as a group. I know that can seem abstract at times, and I know that that's difficult, and I'm not saying we all have to agree on everything or that you can't ever disagree with anything that another feminist woman says, but I do think that there needs to be a much more collective focus instead of just individual choices. And instead of saying, there's this $100 billion a year horribly abusive, exploitative, misogynistic industry, and I've seen estimates saying, conservatively estimating that about 1/5 of that is child pornography of everything that's in the world. So instead of seeing that and saying, I'm going to make this feminist porn that's a little bit better, hopefully, maybe we could spend more of our time and more of our resources understanding why women like Vanessa exist, who don't have other options, who have to do this, who get hurt or abused. And, maybe we could direct our feminism in that collective kind of way instead of just saying, well, I'm going to do something individually that's a little bit different, and hopefully that'll, change attitudes for the better.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. All right, then. What we would like to do, what I'd like to do right now, is to encourage people to read your full article, which is excellent and makes many other points and has a lot of great references in it, so that people can, see the information that backs up all of the points that you make. So we're going to be putting a link to that article right in the top of the description of this video. And also, again, we're going to be putting a link to the study that we mentioned, which demonstrates what the majority of content is in so-called feminist porn or women-directed porn. So please check those things out. And I just wanted to say that everybody out there, that we understand you have things you want to share about this, so please do comment, but we ask that you keep your comments polite and respectful so that we can have a civil discussion here and hopefully all learn from each other. And then also I just wanted to say we'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to this channel and our other channels. We have a number of different channels that address a number of different aspects of sexual exploitation. And if you like this video, please don't forget to share it with everybody or add it to your favorites or playlists. So thank you so much, Maya, for discussing this with us today. Your article really is excellent, and it deserves to have a lot of people reading it and watching this video. And
Right.
I think it's going to give a lot of people a lot of important food for thought and a lot of information so that they can make more informed choices.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure doing this.
Okay. Well, all right. Thank you, viewers out there. We hope you enjoyed this too, and we're going to be making lots more videos, so please check in with our other ones. Okay, thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.